Shelter-in-place essentials for home preparedness. Hello, my friends. This is The Art of Prepping. I've been asked to do this video talking in more detail about these essentials for sheltering in place. There's a lot of reasons of why you may have to do this. For most people, though, it's just a matter of hours or days that you shelter in place because of a local emergency. And it's typically not longer than that. But at a minimum, though, a 2-week supply is recommended. It's a recommendation. And I think that it's optimum to have at least a 1-month supply. Now, this is for people who live in urban and or suburban areas. If you live in a more rural area, you may have less resources in your area to pull from. And so I would actually say that the minimum would be a month and the optimum 2 months. Once again, that's for individuals that are in a more remote location. Now, with that being said, you have to just use your own mind and think this through of what's best for you. I want to start the list out. I have a very good list. I'm not saying this is completely comprehensive for you because you may have special needs, but for the average person, this is going to be a very good list to go off of. And so I would recommend, if you're completely new to this, to get out a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen. If you need to pause the video right now to do that, go do that. But it would be really wise to have some type of means to record down what you need so that you can have a list of your own. And of course, you can go over the list over time and add or subtract things because you may already have some of these items. Some of these items may not be that essential for you for whatever reason. And so you can customize your own list. And that's what I really want you to do ultimately in the long term, is just to have your own list, not my list, but your list. But because I don't know everyone's situation, I've had to come up with a list, a generic list that is going to help most people, more people than not, hopefully. So let's go ahead and begin in this list. The first thing that I would have to say that I think of is water. That's a pretty big deal. Now, shelter is a big deal too, but if you're sheltering in place already, you already have a roof over your head. So you don't have to worry about that at the moment. We'll get into more things that has to do with shelter in a little bit. But when it comes to water, you can't go very long without it, and you're going to have big problems, right? So as a rule of thumb for sheltering in place, I would say like 2 gallons minimal per person per day. And if we're going to be looking at like a 2-week supply, so over 14 days, that's going to be a minimum of 28 gallons. But don't forget to have extra water for your pets, for any type of cooking or hygiene issues that may come up. You're not going to probably drink 2 gallons of water a day, of course. For a lot of people, they would say, 1 gallon a day is going to be enough. But having 2 gallons is a nice buffer. So once again, you could use that for other things as well. When it comes to food, for most people, 2,000 calories is a good minimum to work from per day. So over 14 days, it's good to have at least 28,000 calories stocked up. Once again, this is for a 2-week supply, 28,000 calories. I feel like that for the beginner, and even for those who have been around for a while in preparedness, a good foundation for your shelter-in-place food supply can be built off of canned goods. Canned goods typically don't, expire in like within a year or two. They typically have a best buy date. And after a year or two, when they hit that best buy date, what typically really happens is either the flavor starts to turn or the nutrients start to slowly break down. But it can take many, many years before there's any kind of problems with canned goods. So this idea that, once the date is reached, the canned goods are bad. That's typically not correct. So with most canned goods, you can get anywhere from 2 to 5 years very easily without any problems. And for the most part, you'll probably have minimal degradation of nutrients and flavor. But it just depends on the food, though, of course. So canned goods, just get yourself a nice variety of canned goods and pay attention to the types of nutrition in the foods and how many calories. Some canned goods that are mostly just like vegetables, you're not going to have a lot of calories, right? I mean, you might be able to eat 2 or 3 pounds of it and still not really get your caloric, intake. That's, going to be good for you. So you're going to have to mix foods that may have a little more calorie and nutrient density than others. Okay, so that's just one approach is canned goods. You can also do like dehydrated and freeze-dried foods if you have a little more money, but it can get expensive, especially at the time of this video. That stuff is very expensive. Okay, so you can also can your own food if you have a garden. So if you don't want to go out and buy canned goods, you can can your own. And if you have a dehydrator, you can dehydrate your own food. You can do a lot of things yourself. So this is not like something that you can't do. You can easily do this, especially if you're just putting together a 2-week supply. You can go out right now to the grocery store and do that. You don't have to like piece this together over the course of like 6 months or something crazy. You can break this up over 2 trips to the grocery store or just do it all in one trip. This doesn't have to be a big deal. And it also doesn't have to, cost very much, right? Okay, so the means to cook. This is something that I think is going to be very important to have. If you don't have electricity and maybe you don't have the gas, if you have natural gas coming in the house or any of this stuff, any kind of public utilities, those may not be in working order. So when we talk about shelter in place, we're going to have to just imagine that nothing is working, like no utilities are available. So what kind of alternative means do you have to cook? And I think that, the portable stoves, like those camp stoves, are really ideal for this. And you can get really small gas canisters, and you can even, put a few back, and store those. They have a long shelf life. You can also cook off of a gas grill. A gas grill, though, outside, for example, isn't going to be so ideal if it's in the middle of winter. At the time of this video, we're in the middle of winter, and it's freezing cold outside. And as I speak and look through the window here, snow is coming down. And it would be very uncomfortable, and it's just not ideal to go outside and cook, on a grill. So you're going to have to really figure out some ways to deal with this. The good thing about most canned goods and stuff, you don't really need to cook anything, right? You can just eat out of the can if you had to at room temperature, and it's not horrible. I mean, you may not like that, but, unless you have like maybe a wood stove, that's another good idea. Or even a fireplace, maybe to heat up your food. That's something that you could do. But a lot of people, if we're just being completely honest, a lot of people don't have wood stoves or a fireplace. And a lot of people don't even go camping, so they don't have portable stoves. And a lot of people do have gas grills, so that is kind of a good thing. But once again, how many people are going to go outside in the middle of winter, and especially if there's snow out and it's below freezing, and going to cook your food outside? It's just unlikely, right? Okay, so just have some food, though, that doesn't require cooking. And, even if it comes down to, candles, there's different ways that you can set up candles inside and you can warm up your food. You can do it that way. So there's a lot of very primitive ways you can go about eating without cooking. And if it's coming from a canned good, for example, you can just warm it up, even with it's just like a candle. Okay, so let's move on. And we now have hygiene options. Hygiene options. This is something that a lot of people just aren't thinking about typically if you're new to preparedness, because you're just thinking, oh, there's going to be water pressure, especially if you live in a suburban or urban area that you have a municipal water source, like city water, quote unquote. For us, like myself, that live in a more rural area, we don't have city water. We have either a well or a cistern. And so, I think about this all the time. If I didn't have any electricity, then my well pump wouldn't work and I couldn't get any, water pressure in the house. So if you don't have any water pressure and you can't take a quote unquote traditional shower or bath, then how are you going to keep yourself clean, right? How are you going to basically keep bacteria from just growing all over your body, which can be a big problem. There's multiple ways of doing this, of course. I mean, you can just simply have a little bucket, and put some water in the bucket and put a little soap in there. And then, basically just have a wash rag and wash yourself from that. And then, have some towels to dry yourself off. I mean, that's super simple. But there might be a situation that water is very, very limited and you have to ration the water. This is when you go into like wet wipes, different options in terms of that require little to no water. So wet wipes is really awesome. You can get a big case of those for very little money. And like I got a case, excuse me, I have a case that I bought recently. It was like 800 wet wipes in that case. And it was and I'm trying to think of the exact price, but I think it was maybe $12 or less, maybe less than $12. But yeah, I think it was around $12 if I had to guess. And I mean, really isn't that expensive for that many wet wipes. And the wet wipes, though, aren't the really large, extra large type of wet wipe. It's just the standard size wet wipe. But very handy, though. Very handy. And of course, we're going to want to focus on our face, our hands, keeping them clean, armpits, the groin area, and our feet, right? Of course, the hair, any kind of like areas that we have a lot of hair, we want to kind of deal with that. It's advisable, though, to go ahead and just trim your hair down wherever you have hair. For guys, if you have like real hairy chest, just go ahead and try to remove some of that, if not all of it. It's just a lot easier to stay clean. If you have really long hair or real thick hair, you might want to really trim that down. I know for me personally, my plan is to just give myself a buzz cut. I mean, basically that's just what I would do. If there's like a real emergency, I'm not going to mess around with longer hair. Not that I have longer hair, but I would just pretty much want to get rid of almost all of it, just so that it's a lot easier to manage. So that's just something to put out there, that in a real emergency, you don't want to be fooling around with things that can be problematic down the road. So wet wipes and also hand sanitizers. You have to be kind of careful with the brands, though, now with the hand sanitizers. Some of the companies are not using ingredients that are safe. So you want to do research to make sure that what you're buying is actually safe for you. But various alcohol-based hand sanitizers out there for your use. But once again, just be safe. And when possible, just go with the real big name brands, because they've been shown to be a lot safer. That's what I've noticed. But those who have been, those brands that are imported from like Mexico or China, they're using forms of alcohol that really can be dangerous to us. Okay, so moving on, you want to definitely have a nice stockpile. And I'm not saying like, it's just like a whole closet full of meds. But I'm talking about just, a reasonable amount of stockpile of your commonly used medicines. Okay. So, just over-the-counter medicines. Hopefully you don't use very many medicines. For me personally, I just don't use any kind of medicines. I take supplements and they pretty much take care of me. But if you do take things on a regular basis, you definitely want to have that available. But in my opinion, I would actually research and try to find out why you're having those symptoms and those problems, so that you can kind of like stop using these over-the-counter medicines. And of course, if you have prescription medicines, Just make sure you have a good supply of those. I wouldn't ever get to the point that you're like down to your last pill, and then you're like, okay, I need to go to the pharmacy. I would give yourself a nice buffer. When possible, I would try not to have less than 1 or 2 weeks of your prescription meds at all times. I know for some people that's just not really practical because of how things are prescribed and the systems you may be in, maybe your insurance, but try not to wait to the last minute to refill your prescriptions. And of course, and for that as well, if there's a way to get off your prescriptions, do that. If it's something like you need to lose weight, or if you just need to have a better healthy diet or change your lifestyle, and if that's going to cause you to not have a need for certain prescription medicines, then go for that. I personally know people that stay unhealthy because they say, well, I take these prescription medicines and it helps me. But they wouldn't even need those prescription medicines if they just simply led a more healthy lifestyle. And it's really frustrating for me to see that. It's actually really sad to see so many people suffer, but it's all needless, just needless suffering because of bad choices. Outside of medicines, though, we have first aid supplies, like actual stuff if you actually cut yourself or if you have trauma issues. So first aid and trauma supplies, it's going to be a pretty big deal. And you definitely want to put together, when possible, a comprehensive system. You could obviously just go out and buy pre-made kits, but and we'll talk about this in a moment, though, a little bit more in detail, but it's a lot better to put together your own kit. And really, not only to have at least one comprehensive, first aid or medical system in the home, but to have maybe some other sub-kits, too, around the home and also in your vehicle, in your bug-out bag and so forth. So it's definitely going to be something that you want to have a layered system. And when you need trauma supplies, you're not going to ever have regrets of buying it. You're going to wish you probably bought more of it. So have extra. Don't just think that, oh, I have a tourniquet and I'm great. Because you may need a lot more than just one tourniquet for a certain situation. I hope that's not the case. But sometimes people get injured in ways that require more than one tourniquet. Now, moving on, we have power supply or a power source. Because remember, you're not guaranteed to have electricity or any other source of power if you're sheltering in place, because whatever the situation is going on could disrupt the utilities outside. So having your own power supply is going to really, really enhance your ability to overcome this challenge of having to shelter in place for a period of time. Once again, it could be hours, days, or even weeks. So I think that for most people, the most practical approach to this, this is over years and years of talking to people and all this and just researching myself. Most people, the most practical thing is just to get a small gas generator, not one that actually can power the whole house, but one that you can plug a few appliances in or a light in or something like that. Basically just something that's reasonable, like a gas generator that may cost just a couple $100, and to have maybe 5 or 6 or 10, containers of fuel with fuel stabilizer in it, just having some extra fuel so you can run the gas generator for a period of time. And of course, once again, if you're in a suburban or urban area, you probably want to have at least enough fuel to get you through 2 weeks, right? That's what we're talking about as a minimum here, because most emergencies last less than 2 weeks. Okay. For those who are more tech savvy, you may want to put together a solar generation system, some solar panels, a battery bank, an inverter. It doesn't have to be very expensive. And once again, it doesn't have to power the whole house. It could just give you enough to power a few appliances or to run some lights and so forth. And so moving on here, I just want to also highlight that you should have the means to heat and cool your home. The means to heat and cool your home is very important. During the summer, it might just be something as simple as having the ability to run a few fans to move some air through the house. But during the winter, this can get pretty serious. Depending on where you live, if it gets really cold, you don't want to have to deal with hypothermia. That can be very deadly. And so you definitely want to have a means to keep your home warm. And if not the whole house, then at least a room or two, right? Wherever you're at, you want to be in a warm location. Of course, having a wood stove is really, really helpful. But once again, I don't think that this is something that most people have, and they're not going to be motivated to put that in their home. I even heard that in some locations, it's not even allowed anymore, wood stoves, because it's supposedly a fire hazard and all this. But basically, yeah, it's something that would be really awesome to have. A wood stove, you can cook food off of it. You can obviously warm your house with it, and it gives off light and so forth. So you have that. You also have just proper clothing for the time of year. It's not so hard to wear less clothing, but do you have the proper winter clothing though? That's really important to stay warm. So in a worst case scenario, if you have no power to the home and you don't have a wood stove, you may have to just find an interior room in the house and do the best you can to insulate that room. It could be with blankets or whatnot. It could be with mylar foil. And you want to make that room kind of like the home base of the house. And you can light a few candles, and just a few candles in a small room can go a long way. It can definitely elevate the temperature a number of degrees. And we're going to get into a few more things here in just a moment about what you can do in a real emergency if there is no power in the home and the home is getting really cold, like dangerously cold. There are some other things you can do. But moving forward here, we just need to really focus on having the proper clothing for the time of year. Just layering up can do so much to enhance your body's ability to retain heat. And when I'm talking about layering, you may even have to put 5 or 6 layers on, and then even put a blanket over top of you over that, just to really try to hold that heat in. Okay, so I think this is a good time to kind of talk about wool blankets. Blankets come in all different types of materials, but wool, especially 100% wool, is just fantastic. I have a few Army surplus 100% wool blankets, and they're very heavy duty, really thick, and very warm, very warm. And so that would be an excellent resource to bundle up with, and just to help stabilize your core body temperature. There's nothing wrong with getting wool blends, but just stay away from, cotton as much as possible. If you're going to get a wool blend, you might want to go with like a polyester, a wool blend, because that can actually be beneficial to help wick away any moisture. But definitely, just stay away from cotton. The means to store and secure garbage. This is something that really doesn't get talked enough in the prepper community, and there's not a lot of people that are really putting out plans on how to deal with waste during a shelter-in-place scenario. So you have really just 2 options, right? I mean, you can store your garbage in the house, or you can store the garbage outside the house. And if it's outside the house, you might have like a secondary building that you could put it in, or maybe there's an area on your property that you could store it that's somewhat secure to keep, animals from tearing into it. But overall, though, you're going to definitely need to have a plan on how to deal with this. I personally wouldn't want to keep garbage in the house for weeks at a time. It can breed bacteria and fungus, anything. I mean, it's just not a good thing to have. And so you'd obviously want to bag your garbage and try to get it outside the house. For some people, they have a plan on like burning their garbage. Some things that when you burn, it becomes toxic in the air, and it's not something that I would advise. I don't really like the whole idea of burning garbage. But there are some things you can safely burn, but just don't be burning plastics and rubber and everything like that. Okay, so definitely some type of garbage planning management, protocol is going to be needed very much so. If it's just you, like if you live alone, this is not going to probably be that big of a deal, right? I mean, if you have a shed or a garage, you can just put some garbage in there and it's not that big of a deal. But if you have a large family, like a really large family, it's amazing how much garbage can be produced. And then we also, of course, have to talk about, bathroom, type of situations when people are using the bathroom, using the toilet, I should say, especially if there is no water or there's no water pressure, in the home. Not only will you need water to help flush that, but there may be a point though that the sewer gets backed up too, right? So you may not be able to use your toilets. So do you have an alternative means of going to the bathroom? And so in this situation, and I've talked about it in the past, but it's been a long time since I've really talked about this particular issue. Having 5-gallon buckets that you can use as makeshift toilets. And you can fill it up with sawdust or kitty litter. There's a whole host of other options out there, but you definitely want to put some garbage bags as liners in there as well. And so personally, I have a large stockpile of 5-gallon buckets so that I can use them for a variety of things, including if I need to use it as a toilet. Now, this is certainly something that once these bags start to get even remotely full, you'd want to remove them, sanitize your toilet, whatever that may be, if it's 5-gallon buckets or something else. And you want to remove this from the house. You don't want bags of fecal matter or even urine in the house. That is really a recipe for disaster. So you definitely want to think this through, okay? Now, moving along, I want to say that you definitely would also want to have the means to construct a super shelter. And we were talking a moment ago about having the ability to heat and cool the home, proper clothing, blankets and so forth. And if you had to, you may have to find an interior room to insulate. For some people, they don't really have quote unquote like an interior room. Some houses are actually like an open floor plan, that there really is just maybe a couple small rooms that are actually closed, like a bathroom and so forth. You could use those, but a lot of those may be on the peripheral of the house, on the outside of the house. So it may not be that beneficial, but sometimes a smaller room is just a lot easier to manage than a larger room, obviously. But in some situations when you don't really have an optimum room to work from, you may want to develop or construct a super shelter. And this is simply something that you could put together pretty quickly. If you have a tent, even if you don't have a tent, you can just use tarps and you can make up your own structure in the living room, for example. You just want to put together, let's say you have a tent, you put your tent together and you would take some plastic sheeting, even if it's something like garbage bags that are cut open and taped together. You can put a tarp over your tent as well. Basically, you want to insulate a shelter, and that's called a super shelter. And, it's something that can really help to insulate and hold heat in. And you'd be really surprised if you light a few candles, in a tent that's insulated very well. Of course, you can put blankets over the tent as well. Mylar blankets will help a lot as well. I mean, you can do a lot. And just a few candles in a tent with your own body heat, especially if there's multiple people in the tent, you can actually do quite a bit with that. You can stay warm for a long time. Okay? So that's something that you can do in a real emergency. And of course, if you have small kids, you can just act like or pretend that it's like some type of, camping experience. You can make it fun, and make it less scary of what's going on. So, of course, I'm just pointing out that the obvious, that you don't want to scare your kids. You don't want to freak out. You want to be the person that's kind of level-headed when all this goes on. If you have to go through something like this, hopefully you would never have to go through something like this. But definitely, though, you'd make it more like an adventure, and make it as fun as possible, make light of it. This is where humor comes in. When you look at the various psychology of survival, humor can go a long way. And that's why the military uses so much humor. Now, sometimes the humor is quite dark, but sometimes you just do the best you can with the situation. Sometimes humor is all that you have to deal with certain things. It can definitely be a coping mechanism. So embrace humor. Okay, so entertainment. Now, you may say at this point, whoa, this is not essential. You don't need entertainment. How is that essential? In some ways it is, in some ways it's not. But the way I'm looking at this is this, especially if you have kids, but even if you don't have kids, even if you live alone, having something to preoccupy yourself in a healthy way, a healthy distraction, maybe it's a book or a game that you can play, can really keep your mind a lot sharper, and you can keep your sanity a lot longer, right? Because if you're just constantly droning over something that's negative, that's really not good for you, and it really can wear you down. It can just wear you out. So have some healthy distractions. Next is a surplus of fuel for your vehicle. And this is going to be a side note, really, but I know we're talking about sheltering in place, but there could be a point in time that you can't shelter there anymore and you have to egress. Maybe it was safe for the first week to be in your home, but maybe the threat is now in your backyard and you can't just stay in your home. So this is something that, even though it's a side note, it's good to have extra fuel for your vehicle to keep it topped off. So if you have to go in your vehicle and get away from a threat, you can egress. And also, since I'm talking about egressing, just for a moment here, I need to touch base on the bug out bag. You may call it a go bag, you may whatever, but basically a bag for egress so that you can have something to help you get to a bug out location or just a place of safety. And I'll just leave it at that. But those things are very important, right? And just understand that what you need, when you bug out. You want to think through all this. I have videos on all this, and there's tons of other videos on the web besides my own. So, you have a lot of resources there to look at. Next is to have fire starters. So a lot of people who have gas grills, they're not like grills that have ignitions. You have to actually light the grills. If you're trying to have some light in the house or to try to warm up yourself using candles, well, you're going to need a way to get those candles lit. And we can go on and on with this, but it pays to have at least a few lighters. I think the lighter is the best format at this point. Yes, there's like dozens of other ways to start fire, but let's just keep it simple and practical. Have some good quality lighters. And if you're going to go with disposable lighters, get a variety of brands and get a whole bunch of them. So you have lots of redundancy, lots of options. Okay. I have personally bought lighters that were name brand, but got a bad batch. Like, for example, a few years ago, I bought some Bic lighters and there was a whole pack of them that I bought that was defective. And I've never had that problem before, but it was the whole pack was bad. It was just a bad production, And so this can happen. And so you don't want to be like, oh my gosh, I bought a pack of lighters and they were just all bad. So that's why I'm saying you want to mix it up. Different brands, maybe 2 or 3 different brands. And you want to get maybe a few packs maybe of each brand potentially. And I would buy them at different times, at different stores, so that, the likelihood of you getting the same bad batch is very low. Okay, moving on. I think it's really smart to have self-defense tools, protective gear. I mean, everything from like N95 mask to body armor for those who, feel like that's necessary. And of course, any other tools that are legal in your area, anything that's legal in your area to defend yourself. It could be, OC spray, like pepper spray, pepper gel. It could be firearms. It could be whatever. Whatever you feel comfortable with, whatever you have skills to use. Just because you're sheltering in place doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to be safe in your place. There may be other people that are trying to take advantage of the situation, while public services, maybe the police department, has their hands full dealing with an emergency. A lot of times criminals take opportunities like this to go and to try to hurt other people or to steal things from other people, especially in like urban areas. So we need to be very mindful that when there's an emergency, like a regional or local emergency, that increases potentially the odds of crime. Okay. Not always, but there's tons of examples historically that this happens. So you'd want to really lock your doors, lock your windows. If you have a gate, that can lock off or block off your driveway, lock your gate. If you have security cameras, turn them on and monitor them. If you have a security system, turn it on. If you know how to use a firearm, then you want to put the firearm and keep it on your person so it's available, and so on and so forth. But basically, having self-defense options that are at the ready is very, very much recommended. Okay, a radio to collect information. If you're going to be stationary and you're not going out, then you're not able to collect information outside the home. So you're going to have to collect information that's over the air. Okay, and a radio is the best way to do that. But the more, radio bands that you have available, the more odds that you have of collecting more information. I mean, it's simple. So you could just have like an AM or FM radio, and that probably will be enough in most situations. But if you live in a rural area like I do, there's very few channels that we can even pick up because I'm so far from the nearest transmitter. So I personally can only receive a few FM channels and just a couple AM channels. I just don't have a lot of options. And so it's good for me to have a weather radio to pick up the weather band as well. And also, what I've done is have shortwave radios so that I can pick up various broadcasts from longer distances. Okay, so you want to have a comprehensive radio system that can collect information from a variety of radio bands. Okay. A light source. Now, this is something that's really important. I mean, a lot of people just, in some ways, oversimplify this, and they go, well, I have some candles, and I'll just light a candle, and I'll be able to move around the house. Candles have its place in emergency preparedness, but in the modern day, there are so many more efficient options, just better options overall, to light the house or to light your way. Headlamps, I mean, there are some really good headlamps out now for very low amount of cost. You definitely want to look at getting a good headlamp for every person in the family. So everybody has a personal headlamp. And beyond that, you may want to look at, handheld lights. I would have at least one searchlight that has a really good reach that can really project out in case you just need to go outside and to identify potential threats in your area. You can do that. So you can really get that light out and project that light. So light sources, do some research. Now more than ever, you have the most options out there in the market for good quality lights that run a long time period. I mean, there's some run times now that are just super impressive. And the light output as well is just amazing. So the light industry has really ramped up in the last 5 years, in my opinion, and given us so many more options that, are almost like unreal. What you have available to you as a civilian it's overwhelming, and so it can take a while to really, whittle down what you even would consider getting because there's so many options out there. And I would not advise going to a big box store to get your light. Do some real research and get a real brand, And I'm not saying that big box stores don't carry real brands, but there's a lot of stuff that's a lot better than what you can get at a big box store typically. Okay, moving along here. Don't forget to have some tools to do home repair in case something happens. Maybe there's a storm system that comes through and it does some damage on a roof or breaks out a window or whatever. A toolkit is going to be very important. And, especially tape. This tape, I use so much tape in my everyday life. It's amazing. And I've gotten to that point, though, that I've had to just realize that Gorilla Tape, just standard Gorilla Tape, is just the best. It's just hands down the best. I've tried pretty much all the other brands over the years, and nothing really works as good as Gorilla Tape. And that's just my opinion, but it's based off of real results. Okay, and also cordage. Get yourself some good parachute cord, right? And if you need a heavier duty cordage than that, then do research and get that as well. But at least have some type of cordage. Okay, and have some good nails and some screws in case you need to do repair, and have some tarps and or plastic sheeting. So if you need to repair a window or at least patch it up or cover a portion of the roof, you can do that with tarps, plastic sheeting, and your cordage. Okay, and also don't forget your batteries, extra batteries for stuff. I mean, it should go without saying, but a lot of people, they'll buy an extra pack of batteries, and then like 5-6 years later, they'll realize that the batteries are pretty much dead. They're expired or they're just not any good anymore. You got to keep up with this every year, and it's a hassle. But if you have a yearly calendar, every year at the same time, I would say, hey, check the date of your batteries. And when they get a few years close to expiring, go ahead and start to use those batteries and get yourself a fresh batch of batteries. And what I've done, though, is that most of my batteries now are rechargeable. And I think that's just the way to go. And I have solar chargers that can charge my rechargeable batteries. So those are even better. Now, I have some tips here before I close out the video. And I just want to say that putting together a food box is a good way to start your food supply, your food surplus, if you will, especially if it's outside the pantry. So you may have a pantry and you may have a few things in there. Some people I know have pantries, but they're really small and you can't get much at all in there. And then I know other people that have huge pantries and you could put like a month or two of food in there. But regardless, though, if you're trying to like add extra food, this is something that's helped me. I just want to pass it on. That I get a big cardboard box. I mean, a real sturdy cardboard box. And of course, you can get a tote box too. I've done that. I have this also, in my system. But just to keep it as cost effective as possible, I just get a big box. And sometimes you can get these behind like grocery stores or big box stores. They'll just have a bunch of cardboard out there. Sometimes the boxes aren't even broken down. And sometimes you can just ask, the store, can I have a couple like boxes or something? And typically they're like, hey, take as much as you want. And so this is what I've done is that I get a big box and, of course, make sure the box fits a space in your house. You don't want to get this big box and not having where to put it. But it could be in a closet or wherever. But you get a good sized box and you just start to fill it up. I know it's really simple, right? But it's just one way to kind of motivate yourself, because once you start adding a few things in that box, when you look in there and you see that the box is mostly empty, it'll kind of bother you. At least it bothers me. and it motivates me to want to fill the box up. So like what I do is that when my pantry starts to get a little low, I transfer some of the things out of this box into the pantry. And then I have this box that is typically like half full. And then once again, that bothers me and it motivates me enough to go and get more groceries so that I can fill that box up. So it's almost like I have this overflow or surplus pantry. And that's a good starting point, at least, to start to add extra food in the house. Because some people are just like, I'll grab a few extra things and then they'll kind of not keep up with it. But if you have a big box, especially if the box can hold 2 extra weeks of food. That would be really ideal, right? And that's kind of what I've done. I have a big box that's like an overflow from my pantry, and it can hold about 2 weeks of food. And I try to keep that totally topped off. And it just feels really good to kind of look at that box from time to time and go, yeah, I have this extra just in case. Okay. Another tip is to build your own comprehensive medical kit. And we kind of mentioned this earlier, but I wanted to kind of expand on this just for a moment. When you buy these pre-made kits, a lot of times you're not even really sure what you have because you're not really going through everything. When you buy a kit that's pre-made, you're just kind of like, it's all here, I guess, and you just go on with it. But when you build your own, you're a lot more methodical and you're a lot more purpose-driven. And if you build your own, you know where everything's at. You know exactly what you bought and what you didn't buy. And you can buy things that you know how to use and not just have a bunch of stuff that you don't even know what it's for. And so this is really important to build your own because you can get the better quality stuff. Sometimes these pre-made kits, if not most of the time, they're filled with just average to subpar stuff. I'm just going to be honest with you. Sometimes you can find kits that are like really premium, but you pay totally top dollar. And so what I've done over time is just when things are on sale, I buy, just the various aspects and just kind of buy each individual items over time and put together your own medical kit, with trauma supplies. Don't forget the trauma stuff. And so, yeah, very, very good thing to do is to build your own kits, including your medical kits. Next is to inspect and to replace any items in your BOB several times a year. And for me, it's like every 6 months. I just take my bug out bag and empty the whole thing on my bed or on a table. And I go through everything. And then I put it all back. And typically what I find is there's like about a handful of items that I don't want in there anymore, or I want to switch out, or I want to upgrade, or I find that there's food in there that is going bad, or the water has been in there for 6 months and I want fresh water. You see, you want to kind of refresh your bag. You want to inspect your bag, and you want to make any kind of replacements that's optimum for your system. And it may be, though, that since the last time that you went through your bug out bag, you had one less child, right? And now you want to add a few things extra for this new child that you have. Maybe, you were single when you had that bag last put together, and now you're married, and now you want to do something extra with that bag. So there's a lot of things that can be very helpful of going through your bag a couple times a year. When I say a couple times a year, is that when you start to change into the warmer season, you want to check it. And then when you're going into a colder season, right? So basically, this is what I do. About mid-spring, I go through the bag. And then when we start getting into the end of fall, when it's getting colder, I go through the bag. And that's just how I do it. But you have to find your own system. Another tip here is to have more than one location on your property to store these essentials. Okay? Because in case something happened to your main house or your main dwelling, you don't want a total loss. And we've talked about this a number of times on the channel. But I think it's important just to say it one more time. So if you have a garage that's like separate from the house, if you have a shed that's secure and in good condition, if you have a barn even, I know people who have barns that the barns are really nice and they actually have enclosed rooms in the barn. Whatever it is, it's good to spread out some of your preps over several different locations on your property. Okay, so you can avoid a total loss. Another tip is to have emergency cash, right, and precious metals to barter and trade with if things got tremendously bad and you had to go to a neighbor and say, hey, I've just run out of food and I need help. Or do you have any spare batteries, to have money for that, or to have things you can trade that you know that they would want or need. That's going to be really smart to have. Now, hopefully you have neighbors that won't even ask for anything. They'll say, oh yeah, I have extra batteries. Here you go. I have neighbors that would do that. They would never probably ask anything for it, but it's always good to have cash and to not take advantage of your neighbors. So even if my neighbors were just trying to give me free batteries, I'd want to pay for them, and that's also a respectable thing to do. Okay. There's nothing wrong with taking a helping hand or taking charity when you really need it. But there's also a point in time that you should also be respectful to other people's charity. Last tip here. If you have a recreational camper or a recreational vehicle or anything that, has kind of like a system put together, a layout in a vehicle that you can kind of camp out in, you might want to seriously look at that as a backup system, a backup shelter option. Now, in most cases, a house is more reinforced and more insulated than a recreational camper. So if it's really cold out, it may just be better to stay in the house, and then when possible, go into an inner room of the house and insulate that room and do the best you can to keep that room warm. But it's just the whole fact that if the home is damaged, if you have a situation where the home is compromised, then there's nothing wrong with going and egressing out to a recreational vehicle, and especially if it's like during summertime and it's not that big of a deal to be out in a camper, Then obviously, or if you have a tent, you can just put up a tent, and camp outside if it's good weather. But I just want to put these things out there, just talk about this. I know it's kind of a long video. This has been a video on shelter in place essentials, home preparedness. Thanks for checking the video out. If you have any thoughts about this topic, feel free to leave it in the comment section. Thanks for your ongoing support. Thanks for liking the video. I do appreciate that. Thanks for sharing the video. I really appreciate that as well. And yeah, let's just continue forward. Even with all the censorship with YouTube, I try to keep pushing forward. It's sometimes hard to make videos. In the last few days, I've had a few of my videos been deleted from YouTube. I get accused of all kinds of things, and they're always incorrect. And it's just so frustrating that when you put time in trying to help other people and you have a system, a platform like YouTube that are run by socialists to come in and they just distort your work and accuse you of things that you never did. It really is hurtful, and it really is very un-American. And I really don't appreciate how those who work for YouTube go about running this platform. And so I'm disgusted by YouTube. And thank God I don't participate and have an account on Twitter or Facebook and all that other nonsense. The only social media that I do is here on YouTube, and I'm about fed up with it. I'm about, I'm about done with this whole thing just because of how ridiculous it is. But I'm trying to hang in there. And so the only reason I'm still around on this platform is because of people like you that watch this video and that are very supportive. I really do appreciate you guys. It's been a real fun journey so far. And I just wish that we could speak our mind more and not be censored so much and not have this heavy hand of social media always, pushing us down. And it's just disgusting. The things that are going on in this country is disgusting. And I fear that it's only going to get worse. And so there may be a point in time that I'm not able to be on this channel anymore. Maybe the channel will be deleted. I don't know. We'll have to see. I have a lot of friends that do some of this similar type of content, and they don't have a channel no more because they were purged. And so it's a sad time in U.S. history to see what we're seeing. And, it started out with progressivism, and then that's morphed into socialism. And, what we're seeing, though, full on socialism in terms of ideology right now with this new administration. And, it's very concerning, the direction of our nation. It's very concerning. And so I guess that the most we can do is to continue to do the right thing and not give in to all this, and to pray about our future, and so that God gives us strength to do the right thing and to know what kind of things to do, and to live the best life that we can But our personal liberties are on the line, and we're going to have a lot less personal freedoms, in my opinion, coming down the pipe. And so it's a very sad time once again. And I wish the very best for everyone. And for those of my friends that don't live in the U.S., I know that you guys are having your own problems. The governments are becoming more heavy-handed by the day, it seems like. It's like every time you check the news, the government has some kind of new regulation or prohibition or limitation they put on you, and it's amazing. It's amazing what's going on. And for those people who don't believe that there's a globalist cabal, there is no such thing as like a new world order. Then you just need to start opening your eyes more. Look around. What do you see? Everything that we've been talking about for years and years is all coming true. And it's actually happening a lot faster than I thought in various ways. It's pretty spooky. The power grab and this push for socialism, and especially here in the U.S., it's probably the most sad thing. Here we're supposed to be the beacon of liberty, right? Personal freedoms. And we are literally, the beacon of light is almost out. It's amazing. And of course, there's people who will tell me things like, we're going to be okay. And they'll try to be positive about a lot of this. But it's also okay to just tell the truth and to say that we are in a crisis right now. We're in a constitutional crisis here in the U.S. We are in the midst of a civil war, be it though it's mostly like a psychological war, and it's like a code war, really. It's like a code war in the sense that things are being done under the surface to a large degree, and eventually, though, we're going to get to the point, though, that it's not going to be so covert, but it'll be more out, and it'll be in the streets. And I fear that this is coming, possibly this year. There's just going to be a big pushback because we're going to have such a change of life. Like what we consider normal society, it's just been changed. That's gone. Especially here in the U.S., what's being proposed is it's frightful, especially when you study the markets. And that's one of my biggest hobbies right now, besides preparedness, is macroeconomics. And it's really interesting to look at the projections of inflation for later on in 2021 and going into 2022, 2023. The amount of inflation that we're going to have here in the U.S. is going to be catastrophic. And we can't have all this socialist money printing and massive social welfare programs, and we don't have any money to pay for it. So besides preparing to shelter in place or any of the other preparedness type of things that we should do and have the capability to do, prepare for inflation, because it's going to really take a lot of people by surprise. But once again, thank you for your support. I'll catch you later.